Hello, everyone. My name is Lonnie Finley, and I'd like to welcome you to this very special presentation entitled The Mystery for Correctly Setting the Date of Pentecost is Finally Solved and Revealed. And friends, I'm going to share information with you regarding how to set the date for Pentecost, which I guarantee 98% of you have never heard from your assembly's pulpit, even though this information can be found 42 times in the verses of your Bible. That's right, friends. And I'm going to show you exactly where these verses are located, and also how to be absolutely sure by the Word of God, which Sabbath a festival observing saint should use in order to correctly set the date for Pentecost. We'll also discuss Joshua chapter 5, and we're going to provide you with biblically based answers to all the questions and confusion that inevitably pops up each year surrounding Israel's first Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread in the Promised Land. But first, friends, we have to spend a little time laying the proper foundation for the biblically based answers we're going to provide. So please, don't go anywhere. Stay with me as we set this important foundation. For you are going to be absolutely amazed, I promise you, at what you learn in this biblical study. Now, let's get going by moving to our classroom format so everyone can see the evidence we provide with their very own eyes. Now, friends, as I just promised you, we're going to find the biblically based answers to the controversy that takes place every year around Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And of course, this controversy involves the Old Covenant wave sheaf offering ceremony, doesn't it? And knowing the correct day it was to be offered. That seems to be a real problem today in the Sabbath holy day assemblies. And this is a very important issue. And why is that? Because if we don't know the biblically correct day, then we'll be keeping the Feast of Weeks or Pentecost on the wrong date, and that's a problem. And for those that may be new to this subject, it's also helpful to know that the annual festival known today as Pentecost was originally referred to as the Feast of Weeks, and we can find that in Exodus 34:22, and the Feast of Harvest in Exodus 23:16. And some holy day observers even refer to it as Shavuot, which means weeks in the Hebrew language. And from this point forward, I'm probably going to mostly use the term Feast of Weeks and Pentecost just to keep it simple. Now, friends, let's begin by reviewing several of the scriptures surrounding the wave sheaf offering controversy, okay? And we're going to start in Leviticus 23:6. And on the 15th day of the same month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread unto the Lord. 7 days you must, that's a command, eat unleavened bread. In the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. But you shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord 7 days. In the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall do no servile work therein. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, now listen to this, because this is where some of the controversy starts. When you be come into the land which I give unto you, and shall reap the harvest thereof, then you shall bring a sheaf of the firstfruits of your harvest unto the priest. And he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord to be accepted for you, and we're going to talk about that later, so remember that phrase, accepted for you. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. And you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, 7 Sabbaths shall be complete. Even unto the morrow after the 7th Sabbath shall you number 50 days, and you shall offer a new meat offering unto the Lord. Now, friends, this wave offering is also referred to as an omer, and an omer is a Hebrew word that simply means a sheaf of grain. And the ritual of counting the days between the wave sheaf offering and the Feast of Weeks is also known as counting the omer. Now, The question that has caused so much debate between a number of festival observing assemblies is, here we go. Since we're supposed to start counting the 50 days to Pentecost beginning with the day or morrow after the Sabbath, which Sabbath are the scriptures referring to? The weekly seventh-day Sabbath or the first day of unleavened bread, which is often referred to as an annual Sabbath? Well, it's a fair enough question. And friends, you know what? This is not a recent dispute between holy day observing groups. For this same issue was a point of great contention between the Sadducees and Pharisees, even during Christ's ministry on earth. You see, the Sadducees believed that the scriptures were directing the priest to present the wave sheaf offering the day after the weekly seventh-day Sabbath. But on the other hand, the Pharisees believed they were to present the wave offering the day after the first day of unleavened bread, which again is often referred to as an annual Sabbath. Now, let's see what the following resources have to say about this feud between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. From the New Bible Dictionary article, Pentecost. Very short comment here, but it gets to the point. The Sadducees celebrated it, meaning Pentecost, on the 50th day from the first Sunday after Passover, taking the Sabbath of Leviticus 23:15 to be the weekly Sabbath. Okay? But that's not the end of the story. However, the Pharisees, as well as today's rabbinical leaders, believe the word Sabbath in Leviticus 23:11 and 15 is referring to the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread, regardless of the day of the week upon which it falls. So let's see what the following article has to say about the Pharisees' beliefs. And this is from the Beth Adonai House of the Lord, okay? Feast of First Fruits and Shavuot. Quoting, the Pharisees, on the other hand, interpreted the Sabbath to mean the day after the first day of unleavened bread, Nisan the 15th, since this day was also counted as a Sabbath. We know this from verse 7, which says, on the first day, Nisan the 15th, you are to have a holy convocation. Don't do any kind of ordinary work. According to their interpretation, the waving of the Omer would always occur on the 16th day of the month of Nisan. And it goes on to say, the controversy was not a small matter. Okay, friends? But with so many resources at our fingertips today, why in the world can't we figure out the true biblical answer to this wave sheaf controversy and all come to understand and embrace the same truth? Well, friends, you know what? It's because in more than a few Bible translations, Leviticus 23:11 and 15 have been altered in order to favor one particular group's beliefs. And as I expose these altered translations, I believe you are going to be intrigued at how cleverly and smoothly this has been accomplished. And to understand how the manipulation of these scriptures came about, we first go back in time to around 163 to 165 BC and familiarize ourselves with the two Jewish sects known as the Sadducees and Pharisees. And in doing this, friends, we'll find out which sect is responsible for modifying Leviticus 23:11 and 15. Now, the Sadducees and Pharisees are believed to have come into existence sometime in the 2nd century BC. The Sadducees were the wealthy, refined sect among the Jews, and most of the high priests were Sadducees. And being mostly high priests, their job was to oversee and direct the temple functions such as sacrifices. And they were also known to be rude and snobbish to the common people, so they weren't very popular among the Jewish working class. But on the other hand, the Pharisees were more representative of the working class people and had the respect of the masses. So while the Sadducees' seat of power was the temple in Jerusalem, the Pharisees controlled the synagogues where the everyday Jews worshiped. But be that as it may, The Sadducees were extremely conservative when it came to their religious observances. Most Bible resources state that the Sadducees believed only in the first 5 books of the Bible, also known as the Pentateuch or the Torah or the laws of Moses. And as a result, they were known for their strict observance of the written letter of the law. In fact, did you know that the very name Sadducee means the righteous? How about that? But on the other hand, the Pharisees, which means separated, insist on a more liberal interpretation of the Scriptures. You see, the Pharisees had a large body of oral laws, not written down laws, but oral laws and interpretations that were inherited from their forefathers, which they made binding on the people. In fact, the Pharisees gave their oral traditions and their doctrinal interpretations equal status with the written Word of God. Now let's see what the Jews' own Mishnah from the Talmud has to say about this. Very short comment on this. It says, there is greater stringency with regard to traditional rabbinic interpretations of the Torah than with regard to matters of Torah. So you see what they're saying here is that their oral traditions from their forefathers takes precedence over the written word, the written Torah. Now, friends, let's pause here for a moment and discuss what the Jewish terms Talmud, Mishnah, and Gemara are all about. Because we're going to run into these terms as we move through this study, and we need to know what these words are referring to. Now, it all started in what is known as the Tanaim period, which took place between 10 and 220 A.D. And this is a period when rabbis expressed their views and opinions and interpretations of the Scriptures, their Jewish laws, their Jewish traditions, and Jewish religion, and then recorded them in writings known as the Mishnah. Okay? And just where do we find this Mishnah? Well, it's the first part of the Talmud, friends. So let me explain. The Talmud is a central manual of rabbinic Judaism and is basically a collection of Jewish laws, practices, and traditions, and is made up of 2 parts, the Mishnah and the Gemara. Okay. Well, the Mishnah basically means a law or a commandment and dates from approximately 200 A.D. It's a written collection of Judaism's oral law, which the Pharisees referred to as their oral Torah. And it supposedly supplements the written laws found in the first 5 books of the Bible. It also includes the ancient rabbis' interpretation of selected Jewish legal traditions. Now, the second part of the Talmud is called the Gemara, which was not written until about 500 A.D. and is an interpretation of the Mishnah. And for the most part, it's basically a Jewish commentary on the Mishnah. And the Gemara and the Mishnah together make up the Talmud. And that's where you'll find all of these Jewish oral laws and interpretations from their forefathers that they actually give more credit to than the written laws of Moses. And it's these oral laws of the Pharisees that the Sadducees so desperately opposed. Now let's see what the ancient Jewish historian Josephus, as well as a couple of other resources, have to say about the Pharisees, their traditions, and oral laws. Now, from Josephus' Antiquity, 1310 and 6, quoting, it says, the Pharisees have given to the people many statutes from the traditions of their fathers, which are not written in the law of Moses. And it is for this reason that the Sadducees reject them, saying that it is only the written observances which are binding, but those which are transmitted by the fathers are not to be observed. And the Book of Jewish Knowledge says, quoting, the Sadducees were implacably opposed to the alien beliefs expressed by the Pharisees. They denounced them as being in violation of the teaching of Moses. For nowhere in the Torah, they averred, and correctly so, was there any authority for them. Now, the disagreement over counting the Omer became such a hotly debated issue that the Pharisees created a dramatic public ceremony which involved cutting the Omer at night just after the first day of unleavened bread had ended. And they did this in order to promote their teachings and draw the people away from the Sadducees' beliefs. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment, like right now. Now, friends, let's review this ceremony and comments made by Rabbi Dr. Hillel ben David in his paper entitled Counting the Omer. And here's what he has to say. Right after the first day of Pesach, on the eve of the 16th of Nisan, prominent Torah scholars and members of the Sanhedrin, the Beis Din, the great house of judgment, would go out into a field of barley near Jerusalem, which had been prepared before Pesach. All the neighboring villagers would gather to watch the ceremony. 3 men using 3 sickles would cut 3 measures of barley, which they would put in 3 boxes. And here we go. Now, Menachlah 64a, and that's from the Jews' Talmud. The sages say, whether on the Sabbath or on a weekday, it was reaped by 3 men into 3 baskets and with 3 sickles. Now, did not our Hanina the vice high priest say there that where it is possible to manage with one, just one person, we must not trouble more to work on the Sabbath? Here, too, since it is possible to manage with less, we must not trouble to do more on the Sabbath. Why call 3 out on the Sabbath to do this work, so to speak, if you can get by with one? Whence do you know this? Perhaps our Ishmael only said so here, since there is no opportunity for making the matter public, but since there is an opportunity for making the matter public, I would say that he is in agreement with the rabbis, that although one person would be sufficient, 3 are to be employed to create greater publicity. See, the rabbis are kind of going back and forth with one another on this issue. Well, why, bring out 3 men on the Sabbath? And basically the decision was made that, well, we want 3 men because it's going to be more of a public activity and draw more of the public. So it goes on to say, once it was dark, the head of the reapers would say, has the sun set? Yes, everyone would reply. Megillah 21, Megillah just means scroll. The whole night is a proper time for reaping the omer, since a master has said that reaping and counting are to be performed by night and the bringing by day. Now, what master? You can't find this in the scriptures anywhere. It goes on to say, the employment of more persons in the service of the omer obviously gives the matter greater publicity and impresses immediately the mind of the people with the rabbinic standpoint that the omer must be offered on the 2nd day of the Passover, irrespective of the day of the week, thus creating stronger opposition to the Sadducees, who held that the omer must always be offered on a Sunday. And that's from Emperor 65a. Now, do you see what's going on here, friends? There's nothing going on here that we with this. There's nothing going on here that's from the Word of God. They're putting on a show right now. So let's finish and talk about this show. So the priest goes on and says, has the sun set? And all the people say, yes. Again, has the sun set? Yes. Then he would point to the sickle and ask 3 times, is this the sickle? Yes, everybody would say. Is this the sickle? Yes. Is this the sickle? Yes. In the same way, he would ask 3 times, is this the box? Yes. The crowd would roar. Is this the box? Yes, the crowd would roar. Is this the box? Yes, again they would roar. He would also ask 3 times, is it Shabbat today? This showed everybody that the mitzvah, the law of cutting the omer, pushes off the Sabbath. Finally, he would ask, shall I reap? Yes, they would answer. Again, shall I reap? Yes, the crowd roared again. Shall I reap? Yes. Now, Rabbi Dr. Hillel ben David goes on to write, this whole ceremony was very awesome. What was it all for? Again, listen, friends, listen to me here, please. Unfortunately, there were people at that time who rebelled against the sages, against the Pharisees and the scribes. They were called Bethusians or Sadducees. They tried to get people not to listen to the teachings of the sages. One of their arguments was that the omer should only be cut on a Saturday night after Shabbat. That's what the Sadducees were saying. Goes on to say, there was also a dispute between the Pharisees and Sadducees with regard to the fixing of the date of Pentecost. The dispute turned on the interpretation of the words in Leviticus 23:15. The Pharisees took the view that the omer had to be brought on the second day of Passover, while the Sadducees maintained that these words meant the morrow of the first Sabbath of the Passover week. And from that day, 49 days had to be counted to Pentecost. And you can find this in the Talmud right there, and it gives you the link for it. In fact, in the Torah it says that the time for cutting the omer, in fact, and it goes on to say here, in fact, in the Torah it says that the time for cutting the omer is the day after Shabbat. But the Bethusians, meaning the Sadducees, said that this meant the day after the Sabbath itself, meaning the weekly Sabbath. But the sages had the tradition from Mount Sinai that Pesach, a Yom Tov, meaning a great day, is also called a Sabbath or Shabbat, and the omer should be cut the day after Pesach. Goes on to say here, finishing up, they made a big ceremony out of it, so that it would be clear to everyone that the Bethusians, the Sadducees, were not correct. The omer had to be cut the day after Pesach, even on Sabbath, end quote. As you can see here by this painting, it drew big crowds, and that's what they wanted. Now, friends, didn't Jesus warn the disciples and all future saints, meaning us, about the Pharisees' sinful play acting in Luke 12:1? Well, he sure did, friends. So let's take a look at this verse right now. Luke 12:1. Meanwhile, when the crowd gathered by the thousands, so that they trampled on one another, he began to speak first to the disciples. Beware of the yeast, the leavening of the Pharisees, that is, their hypocrisy. And just what does the Greek word for hypocrisy mean? So let's look at this interlinear here for a moment. We got hypocrisy, leaven representing during that time sin, right? And we got Pharisees. These are all hooked together, right? Hypocrisy, sinfulness, Pharisees. Now, what does this word mean? Hypocrisy? The acting of a stage player, just like these Greek stage players here. That's what Jesus was saying. They're putting on an act. And just where do you find any such omer ceremony in the Word of God, friends? It's simply not there, is it? You see, this ceremony was not a holy, majestic, biblical ceremony. It was just another man-made Pharisaical ritual created to put on a big public show in order to entertain the Jewish public and draw them over to the Pharisees' beliefs and customs. And if you want more information on this, just look up this link in the Talmud and you can read other information about it. But you know what? The Pharisees' unbiblical play acting worked. And why? Because events like this entertained the people and increased the Pharisees' popularity among the common working class Jew. Again, let's go back and see what Josephus has to say. It says, the two parties have come to have controversies and serious differences, the Sadducees having the confidence of the wealthy alone, but no following among the common people, while the Pharisees have the support of the masses. You see what was taking place there? Play acting, drawing the masses to their Pharisaical traditions. So, now backed by the power of the common people, the Pharisees gained control over the Sadducees and forced them to unwillingly submit to the teachings of the Pharisees. Again, a little excerpt from Josephus. But they, the Sadducees, are able to accomplish almost nothing. For when they hold office, they had the office of the high priest most of the time, they are unwillingly and by force obliged to submit to the teachings of the Pharisees, because a multitude would not otherwise tolerate them. You see what happened? Just like today. You get the masses of the people, the liberals, and they force their ways upon the people. And it's under these conditions that the Pharisees set themselves in Moses' seat, friends, and began setting aside the commandments of God, blending them with the oral traditions of their forefathers. And this is what Jesus himself was referring to when he said, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, in Matthew 23, 1 and 2, and they are teaching the doctrines of men, in Mark 7, 6 through 8. It's also important to know that the Sadducees were at odds with the Pharisees over when to sacrifice the Passover lamb and to keep the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as well as when to present the wave offering. The Sadducees believed Passover and unleavened bread were two separate festivals, and that the Paschal lamb should be sacrificed between sunset and nightfall, which begins the 14th day of Nisan. Let's see what the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia has to say about this. The Pharisees and Sadducees had a dispute as to the time when the slaughtering of the lamb should take place. The former, meaning the Pharisees, held it should be in the last 3 hours before sunset, and therefore at the end of the 14th day. The latter, the Sadducees, between sunset and nightfall, and therefore at the beginning of the 14th day. So we find that in first century Jerusalem, not all Jewish sects were keeping the Passover and presenting the wave sheaf offering at the same time the Pharisees did. And friends, just when did the Jews began keeping Passover on the 15th of Abib and combining it with the first day of unleavened bread? The Jews' own encyclopedia tells us that it was at the beginning of their exile in Babylon. Now let's take a look at the Jews' own Encyclopedia Judaica under the subject Passover, critical view, and see what it says. Quoting, the Feast of Passover consists of two parts, the Passover ceremony and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Originally, both parts existed separately, but at the beginning of the exile, they were combined. How about that? You see, friends, when the Israelites went into exile in Babylon, they were not able to sacrifice a Passover lamb as God commanded them in Deuteronomy 16, 5 and 6. And being held captive as slaves, it was very unlikely the Israelites even owned any lambs to sacrifice. So they decided to combine Passover with the first day of unleavened bread. And when they were released from Babylon, some Jewish sects continued to keep Passover on the 15th of Abib, instead of the biblically commanded date of the 14th of Abib that we find in Leviticus 23, 5 and 6. And just where did God give these Jewish leaders the authority to move the date of his Passover? I can tell you, absolutely nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. And I mention this, friends, because the Jews combining Passover with the first day of unleavened bread has also contributed to the confusion surrounding the proper time to present the wave sheaf offering. For combining Passover and the first day of unleavened bread made these two spring events only 7 days long, right? Didn't it? And over time, the Jews began referring to these combined events as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is called the Passover in Luke 22:1. And in today's Jewish literature, you'll even find them referring to the day after the first day of unleavened bread as the second day of Passover. And friends, that's definitely an erroneous statement. For Passover is a separate event that only lasts for one 24-hour day, not for 2 or more days. Look in your scriptures. It's very specific. It's very clear. Now, the Sadducees as a group began to vanish away after the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. However, and this is very important, the Pharisees' unbiblical oral laws, customs, and beliefs have endured throughout the centuries, having been adopted by rabbinical Judaism. In fact, it was Phariseeism that gave birth to the rabbinical Judaism. Don't believe me? Let's go back to the Jewish Encyclopedia, 1905. Quoting, with the destruction of the temple in AD 70, the Sadducees disappeared altogether, leaving the regulation of all Jewish affairs in the hands of the Pharisees. Henceforth, Jewish life was regulated by the Pharisees. The whole history of Judaism was reconstructed from the Pharisaic point of view, and a new aspect was given to the Sanhedrin of the past. A new chain of tradition supplemented the older priestly tradition. Phariseeism shaped the character of Judaism and the life and the thought of the Jews for all the future. How about that? And the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, 1943, Pharisees, it says, the Jewish religion, as it is today, traces its descent without a break through all the centuries from the Pharisees. Did you know all of this, friends? So we find that today's rabbinical Judaism is actually the offspring of the Pharisees. Now, please listen carefully to what the following Jewish religious leader has to say about rabbinical Judaism. And friends, every saint needs to carry this information in their hearts and minds and never, ever, never, ever forget it. Now, let's read a couple of very important excerpts from an article that appeared in the Times of Israel magazine. But first, I want us to learn a little something about this author, his background and credentials. And that's Israel Drazen is his name. About the author. Dr. Israel Drazen served for 31 years in the U.S. military and attained the rank of brigadier general. He is an attorney and a rabbi with master's degrees in both psychology and Hebrew literature and Ph.D. in Judaic studies. As a lawyer, he developed the legal strategy that saved the military of chaplaincy when its constitutionality was attacked in court, and he received the Legion of Merit for his service. Dr. Drazen is the author of more than 50 books on the Bible, philosophy, and other subjects. Now, this is a pretty honored man, don't you think? And obviously he's Jewish, and he's not anti-Semitic. He's a rabbi, okay? Listen to what this man says, friends. Listen to what he says, please. Quoting, I described in my book, Mysteries of Judaism, that no Jewish holiday is observed today as mandated in the Bible. The rabbis changed every one of them. In short, every Jewish holiday was changed by the rabbis because of changed circumstances. Those who recognize, who can understand today and see that Judaism today is not Torah Judaism, it's not from the scriptures, friends, but rabbinical Judaism, those that can see that are correct, he says. And obviously, this prominent Jewish brigadier general, attorney, and rabbi is not anti-Semitic. He's just telling the truth. So, friends, please, let's grasp this truth, embrace this truth, and carry it with us. The Pharisees and rabbis have changed every one of God's holy festivals and customs, and every one of them would include the Sheaf offering, right? Do we understand the definition of every one of them? Thank you for watching part 1 with us, and we're going to bring it to an end now. Also, as part 2 starts, I'm going to introduce you to a very, very, very important Hebrew word that not many people know, that's in the scriptures 42 times, that will positively identify, absolutely identify the seventh-day Sabbath as the Sabbath in Leviticus 23, 11, and 15 that the Bible is mentioning that we need to pull off of in order to identify the day for the Sheaf offering. So please, please stay with me. Don't miss this, friends. I'm telling you, you've never heard anything before from your church pulpit or any other information like the information you're going to find in part 2. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to seeing you there.